When the homeowners association sent their so-called cops to enforce petty rules, they didn't realize they were picking a fight with the wrong man. My grandfather, a quiet veteran, had a secret weapon, one that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. Little did they know, his 1948 Colt was still loaded and ready for more than just show. Welcome, everyone. Before we dive into this epic story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and let's see how far this story travels. Now, grab some popcorn, because this one's going to get intense. The sun was setting over the quiet suburban neighborhood, and everything seemed peaceful. My grandfather, a proud veteran of the Korean War, sat on his old rocking chair, sipping iced tea on the porch of his modest home. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it carried weight. The community had always respected him, especially after his years of service and his reputation as a hard-working, dependable man. That was until the HOA decided to get involved. For years, my grandfather had been left alone, doing things his way. But a new HOA president had come into power, determined to enforce every rule with an iron fist, no matter how trivial. One day, the first notice arrived. It was a letter demanding that my grandfather trim the hedges around his house to exactly 5 feet, something he had never bothered to do in the 40 years he'd lived there. My grandfather had always been a man who lived by his own rules, but now he found himself at odds with a faceless bureaucracy. The letter was condescending and threatened fines if the rules weren't followed. He chuckled to himself, throwing the letter into the recycling bin. He wasn't about to be bullied by the HOA. Little did he know that this was only the beginning of what would turn into a full-blown battle. The HOA president, a man named Greg, wasn't content with just sending letters. He was determined to exert control over the neighborhood. He sent HOA cops, a volunteer group of self-righteous individuals who took it upon themselves to patrol the neighborhood, armed with walkie-talkies and clipboards, ready to report any perceived violations. One evening, as my grandfather was enjoying his routine walk around the yard, Greg and 2 of his henchmen appeared at his doorstep, demanding he fix a minor issue with his mailbox. Greg wasn't interested in compromise. He wanted to intimidate my grandfather into submission. What Greg didn't realize was that my grandfather was no stranger to confrontation, especially when it came to standing up for his property and his rights. Things started getting tense. The HOA cops began coming by more often, each time finding something else to nitpick. My grandfather, while calm, was becoming increasingly frustrated. He had spent his whole life fighting for his freedom, and here he was being bullied by some self-appointed neighborhood patrol. One day, after a particularly heated exchange over an imperfection in his driveway, Greg threatened my grandfather. "If you don't start following the rules, we'll make sure your property is devalued enough that you won't have a leg to stand on," Greg had said. That night, as my grandfather sat in his living room, he made a decision. He wasn't going to let these people push him around. My grandfather had kept his 1948 Colt revolver in a drawer in his study for years. It had been a gift from his father, and though it had long since been retired from any kind of active use, it was something my grandfather never felt the need to part with. It was a symbol of his past, a past that demanded respect. He hadn't thought about it much until that evening when he opened the drawer to inspect the revolver. A familiar weight settled in his hand. He checked the chambers. The Colt, surprisingly, was still loaded. It wasn't his first instinct to pull it out, but with tensions mounting in the neighborhood, he felt a sense of preparedness was necessary. He locked the revolver away safely. Again, but this time, there was a feeling in the air that made him realize things could escalate far beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. The following afternoon, as my grandfather was sitting on his porch again, the HOA cops returned. This time, it was more than just an accusation about the hedges or the mailbox. They demanded he surrender his right to any decisions on his property, suggesting that his house was a blight on the neighborhood. Greg was there too, and this time, his voice had an edge to it, as if he had reached his boiling point. "You're a stubborn old man, and you're going to regret not listening to us," Greg sneered. My grandfather stood up slowly, his eyes cold with defiance. Greg and his companions moved closer, each of them believing they had the upper hand. They were wrong. My grandfather's calm demeanor concealed an inner strength that few could see. As the HOA cops closed in, one of them, a man named Dave, took a threatening step forward. But my grandfather was prepared. In a swift motion, he pulled the Colt from beneath his jacket, holding it loosely at his side. The sight of the revolver instantly froze the men in their tracks. "Don't make me use this," my grandfather said in a low, steady voice. The men hesitated, their faces going pale. Greg's bravado faded. "You're crazy," he muttered, taking a step back. "This isn't worth it." But my grandfather wasn't interested in proving anything. He wasn't going to fire it. The mere presence of the revolver, the reminder of his past, was enough to stop them in their tracks. The HOA cops slowly backed off, realizing they had underestimated the man they were dealing with. The confrontation was a turning point for the neighborhood. Word spread that my grandfather, a quiet old man, had stood up to the HOA and won. People started standing up for him. The once feared HOA president, Greg, found himself isolated, his authority crumbling. In the end, the HOA backed off, and my grandfather kept his property as it was. No fines, no further complaints. The neighborhood, though quiet, had learned an important lesson. Never underestimate someone who has lived through more than you can imagine. As for my grandfather, he returned to his porch, rocking back and forth, enjoying the stillness of his home. The Colt, once again, remained safely hidden in his drawer. He didn't need to show it to prove his worth. His reputation had already done that.